We're live on YouTube.
This is a bilingual message and will be repeated in English. Hola, mi nombre es Simone Rivadeneira. Este es un mensaje bilingüe que será repetido en inglés. Soy miembro de la Red de Justicia Lingüística de Comunidades Justas. Voy a interpretar la reunión de hoy día entre inglés y español. Un ambiente bilingüe virtual exitoso depende de todos y no solamente de los y las intérpretes. Pueden ayudar teniendo en cuenta algunos puntos. Hablen claramente para asegurar que les podemos escuchar. Hablen a un ritmo moderado. Tengan cuidado de no hablar demasiado rápido, especialmente si están leyendo. Solamente debe hablar una persona a la vez. En un momento, la anfitriona activará la función de interpretación y en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla podrá seleccionar el idioma en el que desea escuchar la presentación, en inglés o español. Si está teniendo algún problema con su conexión, manda un mensaje por el chat a la anfitriona para resolver el problema. Gracias. Hi, my name is Simone Rivadeneira. I'm representing the Just Communities Language Justice Network. I will be providing interpretation between English and Spanish for today's presentation. A successful virtual bilingual environment depends on all of us, not just the interpreters. You can help by keeping a few things in mind. Speak clearly to ensure we can hear you. Speak at a moderate pace. Please be careful not to speak too fast, especially if you are reading. Only one person should speak at a time. In a moment, the host will turn on the interpretation feature, and at the bottom right corner of your screen, you'll be able to select the language you want to hear the presentation in, English or Spanish. This will allow you to hear when speakers of both languages talk, but in your language of preference. If you're on a phone or tablet, you need to find the three-dot menu and select the language interpretation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. My name is Dave Rollins. I'm the city manager, and welcome to our community conversation program. This is our final program this month, and the discussion will last until 7:30 p.m. tonight. Participants will be able to ask questions or provide comments. If you wish to ask a question and you have joined us via the web, please use the raise your hand icon. Once called upon, you will have 2 minutes. If you wish to ask a question but have joined the meeting by calling in, you will need to press *9 in your phone keyboard to raise your hand. Your name will be called using the last 4 digits of your phone number. You will need to dial *6 to unmute yourself, and you will have 2 minutes. Please know the city reserves the right to disconnect your participation if the comments become offensive or foul language is used. I want to thank everyone for attending this program tonight. Tonight's discussion will be part 2, LGBTQIA+ best practices, led by Dr. Sandy Gomez and Michelle Kilpatrick with the Coalition for Family Harmony. Thank you, and the show is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna go ahead and it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Let me fix that 1 second, please.
Sure.
Okay, you should be good.
Okay, can everyone see that? My screen?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you. So good evening. It is such a pleasure to be here with everyone. This is part 2, best practices in supporting LGBTQ+ communities. I'm Dr. Sandy Gomez. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I oversee the Rape Crisis Center and the LGBTQ program, which are housed at Coalition for Family Harmony. And I'm joined today by another team member, and I'll go ahead and have her introduce herself.
Thanks, Sandy. My name's Michelle Kilpatrick. My pronouns are she, her, and her. I'm the LGBTQ+ program coordinator at the Coalition, and I'm also a rape crisis advocate.
Great, thank you. So we really appreciate working closely with the City of Fillmore and having City of Fillmore provide the space for education around better practices and interacting with LGBTQ plus community members, and also beginning steps in education around a shared language that is really aimed at creating community in Fillmore. So we really welcome this opportunity. And although this is the final part 2 for the month, we are looking forward to ongoing questions and ongoing conversations around these topics and how to support each other as a community. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here and talk a little bit about our objectives. So I want to go over some of the, an overview of what Michelle discussed last week. I think it's important to reiterate some of the key points. We will also learn additional best practices in working with LGBTQ plus community members. Some of you may have heard a lot of discussion around pronouns, so we will be discussing pronouns. We want to make sure that folks know what pronouns are and why they're important. And then finally, we'll also begin identifying different inclusive and welcoming language that we can embrace in order to create more welcoming space for our diverse communities in Fillmore. And so really, again, the goal is really wanting folks to embrace and practice a culture of kindness, a culture of respect, and really kind of investing in that and realizing that there's a lot of benefits, not only for LGBTQ plus people and investing in that welcoming, kindness, respectable space, but also overall for the city of Fillmore. So again, we want to make sure that folks understand that there's a difference between sex, gender, and sexual orientation. So let's go ahead and make sure that we have a good understanding of the differences. And in order to do that, I just wanted to quickly review again the binary that Michelle discussed last week, because that binary is reiterated everywhere. It's super pervasive, and it's continuously reminding us of what is, of the way society believes that we should be, right? And so the binary is this idea that there's two ways of being. You're either a male, assigned male at birth, or you're either assigned female at birth. And if you're assigned male at birth, you know, based on your anatomy, that male is supposed to be a little boy that grows up to be a man, and that man is supposed to embrace everything that we think of as stereotypically masculine, and that masculine man is supposed to be attracted to women. That's one part of the binary. The other part of the binary says that if you're assigned female at birth, again, based on your anatomy, that female is a little girl that grows up to be a woman, and that woman is supposed to embrace everything that we stereotypically think of as femininity, and that particular feminine woman is supposed to be attracted to men. So part of the reason for these conversations that we're having last week and then today is to begin to understand that there's a lot of community members that may not necessarily identify with this particular binary, right? And so it's really important that we kind of start understanding that there's other ways that folks may identify, there's other ways of living, other ways of being, and that as a community member, it's really important to begin respecting different community members. So just kind of wanted to reiterate that. So when we're talking about sex, right, we want to understand there's a difference between sex, gender, and sexual orientation. So when we're talking about sex, we're talking about sex assigned at birth. We are talking about anatomy. We're talking about chromosomes. We're talking about hormones. Typically, two of the more common sexes that we're aware of is male and female, but there's also another sex called intersex. And this is a description for someone whose chromosomes and their anatomy don't meet those traditional markers of male and female. And there's about 30 different ways that someone can be intersex. Some folks may not even know that they're intersex. About 1 in 60 people are intersex, and that's about as common as folks who have red hair. Okay, so again, when we're talking about sex, we're talking about anatomy, chromosomes, hormones. So that's sex, male, female, and intersex. And that's very different from gender. When we're talking about gender, we're talking about who we are. And that's different from our sex. We're talking about who we are. We're talking about our innermost concept of self, how we understand ourselves to be a woman, a man, right? Which again is that binary that most folks are familiar with. But part of what we all want you to start understanding is that there's more than two genders, right? We have a list of them in red on the right-hand side. This is not all of them. We're just putting a couple of them in there, but really starting to understand that there's more than two genders that community members in Fillmore identify as. So folks can identify as non-binary, as gender fluid, as transgender. Michelle talked about transgender last week. We talked about how transgender or trans is referring to someone who does not identify with the sex that was assigned to them at birth, right? And so if we can begin to understand that there's more than two genders, right? So if we're asking someone, are you a man or are you a woman? Then perhaps we can begin to understand how that question could potentially be hurtful. That question could be invalidating for somebody who does not identify as woman or man. Maybe they identify as non-binary. Maybe they don't identify with woman or man, right? And so again, starting to understand that there's more than two genders. That binary is a little bit more complicated, right? Because the binary says woman and man, and here we see, and there's only two, right? Binary is two, but we can start seeing how there's other ways of being. It's also important to keep in mind, as Michelle mentioned, that transgender is not a sexual orientation. Transgender falls under the gender category. The word gender is also in the word transgender. So transgender is not a sexual orientation. So if somebody were to tell you, I identify as trans, I identify as transgender, that really tells us nothing about who that particular person is attracted to. All it tells us is their gender, right? And trans people can, identify as women, they can identify as men, they can identify as non-binary. But if someone identifies as trans, it tells us nothing about their sexual orientation. We're just talking about a gender. Okay. So again, gender is tied to who you are, how you understand yourself to be, right? And so that's very different from sexual orientation, which is tied to who you love, right? So that's talking about that physical, romantic, or emotional attraction that someone may have for another person. So of the most common sexual orientation is heterosexual, but everything in red are also additional sexual orientations: gay, lesbian, bisexual, asexual. There's a lot more, right? So again, we're just trying to get you all to understand that there are many different sexual orientations. And that when we're talking about sexual orientation, we're talking about who you love. Okay, so I put the acronym up here. We're not going to go over we're not going to review every single one. The reason we're putting it up is because I'm picking up on a best practice that Michelle mentioned last week, which is a best practice that we are suggesting that you all kind of start embracing, is starting to develop a comfort level with saying LGBTQ. LGBTQ plus, or maybe you say LGBTQIA, but however you're going to say that acronym, saying that acronym with comfort, with confidence. The other thing is, another best practice is starting to develop a comfort level with saying out loud lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, pansexual. And again, developing that comfort level with saying these identities out loud, right? So oftentimes these are identities that have been stigmatized and that have been shamed. And so really, again, saying them out loud and reiterating to community members that there's nothing wrong with identifying with being part of the LGBTQ plus community. So again, really kind of starting to embrace these kind of practical practices. So let's talk a little bit about pronouns, and we'll get to self-identification. So the reason that pronouns are important is because they're really very closely tied to who we are as people. Pronouns become a way of validating who we are as people, how we identify, right? And when we're talking about pronouns, we're really just talking about words that substitute a noun. And when we're talking about pronouns in relationship to LGBTQ plus community members, we're talking about referring to someone in a respectful manner, respecting the way somebody tells you, respecting the pronouns that somebody provides you with, right? So here we have just a very basic sentence here. Chris loves animals. Chris has a dog and a snake that Chris plays with every day. Really, all we know about Chris is that he is a lover of animals, or I already gendered Chris right now. So all we really know about Chris, right? Because that binary is so pervasive. I don't know why I associated all these dogs and snakes with a masculine gender, but really, we don't know anything about Chris other than they're very passionate about animals. Chris could be Christopher, Chris could be Christina, Chris could just be Chris. But if we ask Chris for their pronouns, hey, Chris, what are your pronouns? And Chris says that their pronouns are she, then the sentence would read, Chris loves animals. She has a dog and a snake that she plays with every day. If Chris says their pronouns are he pronouns, then the sentence would read, Chris loves animals. He has a dog and a snake that he plays with every day. Chris might tell you, you know what, thanks for asking. My pronouns are they, them pronouns. In that particular case, then the sentence would read, Chris loves animals. They have a dog and a snake that they play with every day. So again, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about pronouns, right? And we can see how part of the job of pronouns is also using pronouns to substitute the repetitiveness of using Chris's name over and over again, right? So really, that's what it is. That's what pronouns are. So some of the more dominant pronouns that we're familiar with, of course, are the she, her, hers pronouns, the he, him, his pronouns. These pronouns are tied to that binary that we talked about just a few minutes ago. The other pronoun that is becoming more common, there's more, but the one that is becoming more common tied to gender neutral pronouns is the they, them, theirs pronoun. So we also put in other gender neutral pronouns beneath they, them, and theirs. A lot of these are tied to kind of the German language. But again, we don't want to overwhelm folks. For the most part, some of the more common ones are she, her, hers, he, him, his, and then also they, them, theirs. But we wanted to let you know that there's more. But let's start off slow, right? we also wanted to take an opportunity to talk a little bit about honorifics. Michelle and I work a lot with high school, so we work a lot with teachers, and so you may come across teachers or maybe other folks in professional workspaces that might be interested in honorifics. And it's basically a title or phrase conveying respect. It's basically a salutation. So for folks that don't identify with as Mr. or as Miss or Mrs. Some of these folks may opt for the salutation mix. So for some folks that are familiar, for instance, with the term Latinx, the Spanish language is very gendered, right? So Latina, feminine, Latino, masculine. And so that X for Latinx is meant to be more inclusive of a diversity of people. And in that same way, mix, so it would be Mix Gomez or Mix Kilpatrick, is a way for somebody to have a salutation that is more gender neutral. So just wanted to let you all know that there are a growing number of professionals and beyond that you might hear embracing this particular salutation. So pronouns are not preferred. They're mandatory. So we want to move away from asking, what are your preferred pronouns, right? They're just our pronouns. So a best practice is, again, starting to develop that comfort level with asking, what are your pronouns? May I ask for your pronouns? We're also suggesting that best practice is also to develop a comfort level with starting to offer your own pronouns with your name. So, hi, my name is Sandy. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. What are your pronouns? Right? And start normalizing that. Start normalizing that and making that a habit with our friends, with our family, in the workspace, right? Because it really, again, starts creating those welcoming spaces for people to feel like, you know, I can share my pronouns with someone, and it's going to avoid misgendering, which we'll talk about again in a little bit. And we want to be consistent. We want to avoid a situation where we look at someone and say, you know what, I'm pretty sure their pronouns are he, him, but that other person, you know, I'm not quite sure. You know, they appear to be presenting as a man, but maybe they have their nails painted, maybe they are wearing earrings. I'm going to ask that person, right? Because when you ask for that person's pronouns, they may turn around and say, why are you asking me for my pronouns, but you didn't ask that other person, right? So again, we want to make sure that we're being consistent about asking folks and not making assumptions about whose pronouns we think we know. So again, what are your pronouns? No need to say what are your preferred pronouns, just like, what are your pronouns? May I ask for your pronouns? And the reason for that is, again, we want to avoid misgendering, right? So we want to avoid making assumptions about someone's gender, avoid making assumptions about someone's pronouns based on appearance or even based on someone's voice, right? If somebody provides you with their pronouns and we intentionally do not respect someone's pronouns and continue to misgender them and use the wrong pronouns, that can be perceived as an act of violence, right? And again, we want to be kind. We want to create those welcoming spaces. So best practice is to allow for self-identification. And what that means is we're going to make that space and allow people to identify however they want to identify, and we're going to respect that. So again, pronouns are important. They're really important because they're a way of paying respect to someone. They're a way of validating a person, validating the way they identify, right? And that's going to build trust. It's going to build safety. It's going to create welcoming spaces. And that's just good overall for everyone, particularly if you are someone that is a service provider. You want that person to feel comfortable with you so that they're able to tell you what their needs are and you can better connect them to resources if needed, right? Because the issue is that if we are making assumptions about people based on what we see, we close down the opportunity for rapport, right? We shut down rapport. We shut down conversation with a community member. So a best practice that a lot of different organizations have really been embracing throughout Ventura County is this idea of ask, honor, and acknowledge. So we want to ask, what are your pronouns? May I ask for your pronouns? We're also suggesting that you develop that comfort level with starting to, offer your own pronouns when you introduce yourself and your name, right? And that better positions you, if you're volunteering your name and you're volunteering your pronouns, to be better positioned to ask, what are your pronouns? May I ask for your pronouns? So you ask, you honor, meaning you're going to respect the pronouns that that particular person is providing you with. And you're really going to use your best effort to use those pronouns. And we're going to acknowledge if we use the wrong pronouns and move forward, because we will make mistakes. I've been doing this for a really long time and I still make mistakes. I just made a mistake when talking about Chris in the sentence. So we will make mistakes. It's totally okay to make mistakes. We're all learning, right? And a lot of the feedback that we're getting from community members is we can tell when someone's really trying and being genuine about just trying to be welcoming, right? So again, ask, honor, and acknowledge. And again, reminding ourselves that we're trying and it's okay to make mistakes. So this is an example of an exchange between two people. And this is an example where someone corrects another person that misgendered someone that they're talking about. So someone says, I was hanging out with Claudia the other day and she said, they said, right, thanks. Guess what they told me? Right? So folks might correct you, thanks. Use the correct pronoun and keep moving forward, right? They said, and the response is, right, thanks. Guess what they told me? Keep moving forward. Keep it moving forward. Right? Another example might be, maybe I realized that I used someone's incorrect pronoun and I correct myself if I catch it, right? So Toby's one of our team members. He will be, they will be here before 7 p.m. Right? So again, we're going to make mistakes. This is going to take practice. I know that initially when I started introducing myself with my names and my pronouns, it felt awkward, right? But now it's been pretty normalized with a lot of our team members, and that's really a beautiful thing when you it just comes out automatically and you're not thinking about it anymore. So again, this is something that's going to take practice. So this is a statistic that's coming from the Human Rights Campaign, based on a research study that they conducted, and that statistic is using students' chosen names and pronouns reduces negative mental health outcomes by 50%. It's literally suicide prevention. So I'm not quite sure what the percentages are for adults. This is focusing on students, but I imagine that it's the same for adults, right? Making sure that we are honoring someone's chosen name. And by chosen name, it could be a different name from what that particular person was assigned at birth. Maybe it's different from what's on their birth certificate. We're talking about a chosen name that somebody's chosen for themselves that lines up with the way they present themselves and identify. So again, respecting someone's chosen name, respecting those pronouns that they're providing us with is really going to increase someone's positive mental wellness. And that's kind of what we're in a position to be doing as community members, right? Honoring those chosen names, honoring those pronouns, developing those comfort levels with saying LGBTQ+, or however we're going to say the acronym, right? Feeling comfortable saying, lesbian, gay, bisexual. feeling comfortable saying LGBTQ plus community members, right? And feeling like saying that with confidence. So cisgender, we talked about transgender. So we talked about transgender as an adjective that's describing someone who doesn't identify with the sex and the gender that was assigned to them at birth, right? So cisgender also can be cis, it's also an adjective, and it describes someone whose gender matches what they were assigned at birth, right? So I'm cisgender, I'm a woman. I happen to identify with the fact that I was assigned female at birth. And if we remember that binary, if you're a female, then you also identify, then by default, you're also a woman. And I happen to identify as a female and a woman. And so that makes me cisgender. Hope that makes sense. So it's somebody who identifies with what the doctor assigned to you at birth, that sex and that gender. And that would be cisgender. So we thought it would be helpful to just do a quick cisgender privilege check. And so I am going to read 10 statements to you. I'm going to ask that you put 10 fingers out in front of you. You don't need to put them in front of the camera. You can just kind of have both of your hands kind of laid out, in front of you. And once I start reading those statements, if the statement is applicable to you, then I'm going to ask that you please lower a finger. Okay. So if the statement applies to you, please lower a finger. The first one. I can easily get documents, passports, birth certificates, driver's licenses that match my gender. Okay, so if that applies to you, please put a finger down. When I apply for a job, I don't worry about my ID card matching my gender, thus alerting a potential employer that I'm transgender and quite possibly causing me not to be hired. Okay, so if it applies to you, please lower a finger. If you end up in the emergency room, you don't have to worry that your gender will stop you from receiving services. If this is applicable to you, please lower a finger. When I see a doctor, I don't have to educate them about pronouns, gender, or what transgender means. I never worry about romantic partners shifting instantly from amorous affection to disdain or even violence because of my genitals. If this is applicable to you, please lower a finger. It is unlikely that I will be ostracized by my family and friends because of my gender. I can be confident that people will not call me by a different name or use incorrect or improper pronouns. I never have to hold it when public restrooms are available because I'm afraid of possible harassment if I enter a restroom. If this applies to you, please lower a finger. If I'm institutionalized or incarcerated, I don't have to worry about being housed in the wrong section of a facility segregated by sex. It's unlikely that I will be evicted from my home or ridiculed by the media because of my gender. So if this is applicable to you, please lower a finger. Okay, so I don't have any fingers left, right? And so that's indicative of the fact that I have a lot of cisgender privilege, and that's something that that you may want to be mindful of. What are the different things that I never ever have to think about because I'm cisgender, right? And this could be a lot for some of us that are kind of still like processing through it, because I remember the first time I did this exercise, it was just shocking, all the things that we don't have to think about, particularly not being able to pee, because you're afraid that you might be harassed in a bathroom. That's happening to our kiddos. That's happening to our youth all the time, right? To the point where they develop a lot of just health issues. And we have also youth that drop out of school because there's a lot of anxiety around having to use public restrooms, not drinking water, not drinking any kind of liquid to avoid having to use the bathroom. So again, just kind of wanted to do this activity to start to get to have folks think about like everything that maybe we don't think about, that for other people they have to think about all the time, right? What happens if I get in an accident? What's going to happen? You know, what's going to prevent me from being able to prioritize medical care because questions are being asked around my gender, questions are being asked around the fact that, you know, my ID doesn't match something, right? So how can we use our cisgender privilege for good? So this is where proactive allyship comes in. So really being proactive about doing things, that is where we're advocating on behalf of, for instance, our trans community members or our non-binary community members. Just a gentle reminder that Erica does have, we've sent her definitions, both in English and in Spanish, that I'm sure she can share with folks that are logged on, that are interested in getting that material. But really one of the ways is that peer-to-peer education that we started talking about last week is really tapping into our own networks of family and friends and starting to talk to them about different issues that we're learning about today, right? Because we have our own way of sharing that information that is more accessible to our networks. And so really kind of talking about this, starting a conversation about this with the people that are closest in our lives. Don't let transphobia slide, particularly, you know, if we hear jokes, if it's safe to do so, you know, really embrace upstander intervention, you know, and call it out like, hey, that's actually transphobic and that's really hurtful and hateful, right? So really be that person that's going to name something as hurtful, right? And as transphobic. If we're able to do so, accompany a trans or non-binary person to the restroom, right? Be that support person that provides that support to that particular person so that they're able to perform a bodily function that everyone on this call does multiple times a day, right? And also correct people when they misgender someone, right? And it could be as simple as they. Thanks, they went to the market after the movies, right? It could be just a simple redirection and correction of a pronoun. I hope these are, I hope that some of these actions, proactive actions, are things that maybe some of us are already doing or that we can envision ourselves participating in. Again, in an effort to, you know, have conversations on how to better support LGBTQ people, how to create more welcoming and affirming spaces for all of Fillmore. So other ways that we can start thinking about language. Are there tweaks? Are there particular tweaks or changes in the kind of language that I use that is going to allow for more inclusivity, right? So instead of saying that lady over there, perhaps that person over there. Instead of saying ladies and gentlemen will be starting in about 5 minutes. Please take your seat. Folks will be starting in about 5 minutes. Please take your seat, right? Or everyone, please take your seats. We'll be starting shortly. There's a lot of other different words that we can use that are not gendered, that again, create more welcoming spaces for everyone. And for folks that might be thinking, you know, I don't understand why this is a big deal, right? So again, I would encourage you to think about how that might be tied to cisgender privilege, about how there's certain things we don't have to think about, right? Part of my cisgender privilege is that if somebody, I mentioned earlier that my pronouns are she, her, hers, my cisgender privilege is tied to the fact that if somebody misgenders me and refers to me as a he, 100%, I will never, ever, my mental wellness will never, ever be affected by someone misgendering me. Never. I might even think it's like, oh, that's weird. But for somebody else, that could cause anxiety, that could contribute to a lot of different mental wellness concerns, right? So instead of saying sister or brother, maybe I can say sibling or a relative. Instead of boyfriend or girlfriend, maybe I can say partner, spouse, significant other. There's so many different ways of referring to a boyfriend or girlfriend that is inclusive, right? And also is respectful of our partner. Instead of using she, her, or he, him, maybe because we don't know that particular person's pronouns, we can refer to that particular person using they, them pronouns, right? The other thing is maybe we have that person's name. Michelle and I are both advocates. And so when we have a survivor's name, that is absolutely golden, right? Because we have a name to refer them by. And let's say someone doesn't have a comfort level with asking for someone's pronouns. Probably by the 10th time that you use that person's name, they're probably going to tell you, Sandy, my pronouns are actually he, him pronouns. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Right? So I hope that these are, that this is language that we can envision ourselves using, and that we can start thinking about what are the little changes that I can make in current language that I use that I can replace with more inclusive language, but is still allowing me to express whatever I need to express, right? So I can tell people to take a seat because the program is about to start without having to gender people as ladies and gentlemen. Just something to think about, right? So we're providing you with different practices, that you could potentially embrace. Other terminology, and I can actually send this particular image to Erica for folks that want to have it handy. So these are suggestions that were created by a trans man that kept getting particular statements coming his way. And so he created a little cheat sheet notes of sorts. So instead of saying he is a transgender, he is transgender, or some folks might shorten it to trans. So he is trans. So he is transgender, not he is a transgender or he is transgendered. He is transgender, right? And again, instead of saying he transgendered a few years ago, he transitioned a few years ago. Moving away from he changed genders to he transitioned. When he was a girl. Instead, when he presented as a girl, when he presented as female, before he became a boy, before he transitioned. Just a gentle reminder that when we're talking that transgender is a gender, it's not a sexual orientation. Right? So if somebody tells you they're a trans man, they're just talking about their gender. It tells us nothing about their sexual orientation. But there's a lot of trans people that may be gay, they may be lesbian, they may be bisexual, they may be straight, but we don't know that just by someone telling us that they're a trans man. All we know is a gender. Also, avoid asking any questions around surgeries or body parts. It's completely inappropriate unless a person is specifically inviting that particular conversation, right? But we wouldn't, no one, I can't imagine anyone asking us about our body parts, right? And so again, we want to avoid objectifying trans people. So again, we really want to reiterate this idea of, practice with practice, practice saying your name, practice volunteering your pronouns when you introduce yourself, and normalize this practice. Like, we can normalize this as a community. And just, again, this goes a long way in creating welcoming spaces for community members in Fillmore. And it takes practice, because initially it might feel a little awkward, but if we practice, we can start doing this. I feel confident that we can all do this. Visibility markers, really important as well. A lot of the feedback that we get from community members, or I also identify as part of the community, is, we're often looking for, like, who has the rainbow sticker up, who has the different, there's so many different flags. Michelle talked about how different identities have different flags and colors associated with them, but this could be a great way of showing your allyship, right? We want to avoid people just kind of slapping stickers everywhere, right? If you're putting a sticker on your door or your window, or you want to make sure that you've done some of that labor around educating yourself around LGBTQ plus issues. But these visibility markers are really important in helping to identify to someone who might be in crisis or might be in need. These can be ways of identifying a safe person to come to for support. Right, so there's a lot of different types of visibility markers, and these are just some of them. Other things that we might be able to do as well, again, is if we're comfortable doing so, think about adding your pronouns in your email signature, right? So Michelle and I both have our pronouns in our email signature. We also have a link telling folks why we share our pronouns, right? So that's available for folks. They can reach out to us directly and say, hey, why do you share your pronouns? Or people might feel more comfortable just clicking on the link and reading themselves some of the reasons why folks share their pronouns on their email signature. And we also have a visibility marker as well. So this is the progress flag, as Michelle mentioned last week. That includes that also includes the transgender flag, and it also includes the brown stripe for people of color and the black stripe for Black community members. So again, another practice that folks can embrace to bring visibility around pronouns and an issue that's impacting LGBTQ plus folks, particularly trans, non-binary folks. All right, so just wanted to reiterate what our services are. We do have 10 free counseling sessions that we offer to folks that are part of the LGBTQ plus community. All of our therapy is currently via telehealth. At the moment, our therapists are at capacity, but what we did do is provide a list here of the active groups. It's now summer for Oxnard High School and Ventura High School, so those groups are currently on hold, but our trans adult group is currently active. These are clinical groups along with our gender diverse teen group, which provides support to youth that are between the ages of 12 and 18. If anyone is interested in enrolling in these groups, we've noted the phone number and also the email where you can reach out to our navigation team for an intake. And that would be the first part. And then you would be connected to the clinician that runs that particular group. So again, we always want to make sure to provide local resources. So we definitely have local resources here, but we also have resources that are located in Los Angeles, such as the LA LGBT Center and the Gender Center. We've also noted crisis lines, and it's important when you're thinking about crisis lines, or if you're a service providers, to also think about, are there other options in addition to those 24-hour crisis lines? So we've made sure to include those particular crisis lines that also offer the ability for folks to text or to live chat. So again, just a reminder that we will be present at Fillmore's Pride Resource Fair, which is this coming Sunday from 4 to 7:30 p.m. Yes, Michelle, I think I have that correct. So we will be there on Sunday. We will have literature in English and in Spanish. We hopefully, hot off the press, we will have our translated LGBTQ plus fact sheets. So we're looking forward to sharing that, sharing these resources with the community. And we've also been working hard to, actually Michelle and family has been working hard to create pronoun pins for folks that, you know, are interested in having pronoun buttons. Again, normalizing, asking questions about why pronouns are important or whatnot. So for folks that have any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions now.
Okay, just a reminder that if you have questions or comments, if you wish to ask them and you have joined us via the web, please use the raise your hand icon. And once called upon, you will have 2 minutes. If you ask to ask a question or make a comment and you have joined the meeting by calling in, you will need to press *9 in your phone keyboard to raise your hand. Your name will be called by using the last 4 digits of your phone number. You will need to dial *6 to unmute yourself, and you will have 2 minutes. Again, please know the city reserves the right to disconnect your participation if the comments become offensive or foul language is used. Thank you. Eric, if you have anybody out there, go ahead and bring them on in. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Luana?
Good evening, Dr. Gomez. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. So I was wondering, what do you recommend when people share or transphobic stuff on social media? Because we all know that social media can be so toxic, and it is so difficult to talk to people on that platform. What is the best way? And I don't know why, but recently I've just have a few people that have been sharing stuff like that, and I don't know how to approach it over the web. I feel like if it was face to face, it's so much easier to shut things down and educate people, but it's so much harder when you're online.
Mm-hmm. Michelle, do you have any thoughts on social media?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for the most part, people don't like feeling like they're being called out publicly. So if it's possible to privately message somebody, you know, I think responses to that will depend on your relationship with that person. If it's a family member, maybe you can call them or talk to them face to face. If it's more of an acquaintance, then maybe a private message is more suitable. Or if that's not an option, or maybe you're not close enough to even do that, I try to keep it positive on social media and just point people in the direction of resources. I will say, in experiences with some people in my life, it has been ineffective to even try to educate from like a neutral, positive place, but I think it's always worth trying. But again, when in doubt, I'd say privately message somebody just so they feel maybe a little bit less defensive.
Yeah, I guess I'm not on social media as much, or I'll give the an example, for instance, of some of the pushback that we got after the raising of the flag in at the government center. I was really grateful that Michelle had given me a heads up and had told me, hey, I'm not quite sure if it's a good idea for you to kind of, you know, you may want to, like, there's like, yeah, like a lot of kind of hateful messages taking place on the Facebook page, not sure if it's productive to kind of look at them. So I think I, I really like Michelle's response. I think there's a difference between environments where um, for instance, like a classroom setting, you know, where might have a little bit more control to be able to provide education that's appropriate in that classroom setting versus getting caught up in toxic messaging where even if I'm trying to do upstander intervention, it's getting lost in just a lot of toxic stuff. And so I would say just be mindful of self-care for yourself. You know, I like the idea of what Michelle said, that depending on who it is, maybe private messaging or maybe just posting some resources. Perhaps there's some folks that are going to be open to seeing particular links that are humanizing the impacts of that transphobia. But from my end, I like to kind of focus on you know, the spaces that I travel, trying to provide as much information that I can or that humanizes the impacts of isms, homophobia, transphobia, racism. But I would be mindful of just making sure that particularly our teachers, our service providers, folks in key leadership, that you're all taking care of yourself and not getting caught up in the and social media that can become really toxic.
And just to add to that, you know, sometimes when you are publicly commenting on somebody's transphobic post, they might not be open to learning, but I always like to think maybe there is somebody who's reading this, whether they're engaging or not, who really needed to see my comment. That's affirming, and that's a comment from a place of allyship. So maybe the original poster is like whatever, but the people who are reading it are like, okay, I feel seen and I'm feeling heard, and maybe one person isn't getting it, but I'm reminded that there are people on my side.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think we definitely probably should be coming up with more better practices on what allyship looks like specifically within social media space. So I'm definitely making a note of that as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none.
Okay, well, I want to say thank you to Dr. Gomez and to Michelle for both your presentations, very informative. I learned a few new things here. So thank you for your time and effort, and hopefully it gives educational process here. As our communities, we're starting these community conversations. We're doing more throughout the year. And again, thank you for your time tonight, and thank you for everybody who has participated tonight and also last week as well. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.